Okay, I think we are now officially live. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Thank you all for coming to join us today. Today I have some special guests with me. As you can see, they're going to introduce themselves in a second, and we are planning to do a live show to talk a little bit about the SPFBO, which is the self-published fantasy blog off. This is an event that I am taking part in as a judge this year, and I did it previously the last 2 years as well. So I'm really excited to get some of you a little bit more involved. But I also wanted to get some of the people who are actually doing the competition or have taken part in either the process or in the design of it or are kind of entering it this year to tell you a little bit about their experience with it as well. So if they can introduce themselves, let's get started. Over to you, Anita.
Okay, I'm Anita Stewart. I write under AF Stewart, and my specialty is horror and dark fantasy. And this is my first year in the competition, and I have my little book here, Ghosts of the Sea Moon. That's what I entered. And so I'm actually really excited to be here and discovering what it's all about. And so far, I'm having a blast.
Great, thanks. Jonathan.
Hi, I'm John Auerbach. I'm an attorney by day, fantasy writer by early morning and night. This is my first year entering SPFBO with my book, Guild of Tokens, Urban Contemporary Fantasy. I think I followed last year's contest from the beginning to the end, and I came across SPFBO against during the previous final, so I'm excited to be an entrant this year.
Great. Okay, Mihir.
Hi, Kitty. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name's Mihir Wanchu. I'm one of the judges for Fantasy Book Critic. I've been a blogger since 2009, and I'm just happy to be here to talk with these esteemed guests of yours.
Great, thank you. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah K.L. Wilson. That's the name I write under. I'm a YA fantasy writer, USA Today bestselling author, and I've been writing since 2016, and I joined SPFBO last year at the invitation of John King, who is another indie author friend of mine. I loved the competition last year, even though my book didn't get very far. And I'm excited for doing it again this year. There's so many neat people to meet, and it's such an exciting competition to find new books to read it from.
Great. Cool. So thank you all so much for joining me on your Saturdays. I'm very excited about this because A, I haven't done a live show for ages, and B, talking about the SPFBO, there's actually a Facebook group, which I think you're all members of because that's where I found you all. But there's a big Facebook group, which I've linked in the description down below for you guys who are watching. And that's where kind of most of the discussion happens. But we don't get a chance very often to sit down kind of in person over the internet and talk about it. So I thought this would just be a fun way to kind of just go into a little bit more detail for those who are watching who maybe don't know quite what the competition is or how it started, and just tell them a little bit more. So I believe, Mihir, you were kind of in the beginning phases when it all started. I wasn't. So you're maybe better to talk about kind of what happened with SPFBO, like how it really came to be.
Sure. Originally, this was the brainchild of Mark Lawrence, as we all know, along with Sarah from Bookworm Blogger Blues. Mark one day, I think, reached out to me and asked me, that would I be interested to join in as a judge for this, for the indie books. As you all very well know, before, I think this was in 2015. Before 2015, indie books kind of had not such a good reputation. There was not a lot of blogs who even reviewed it, and most people thought that, you couldn't get it into traditional publishing. That's why you were self-publishing. Mark, I think, wanted to dispel everyone else of that notion. And when I think he and Sarah came up with this idea that, that we could have, if you could get 10 bloggers to maybe come together and, have a competition of sorts. And so he went out seeking people. I think he reached out to me. He reached out to the folks at Fantasy Faction. He reached out to Sarah, of course, was there. And I think there's a few other blogs, which off the top of my head I cannot remember, but anybody can look it up because Mark has it all cataloged on his blog. And so that's how we came together. At first, I think in the first edition, it was only about 250 books. That was the cutoff. His aim was, if he could get 250 books, the competition is on. And it was all new for us because nobody knew what to expect. And the first competition year was like a very not a difficult one, but it was a very interesting one. We had a few books which came out of the blue, and Michael McClung, I believe, was the winner of it. But there's also another Australian author whom I cannot remember off the top of my head, but he actually ended up with a Orbit Books publishing contract as well from that. And I'm really bad with names, but I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But yeah, that's how SPFBO started. And I think, Katie, you joined us from the third year, from
Did, yeah.
2017, if I'm not
Yes.
wrong. And
Yeah.
since then, it's been flourishing.
Yes, definitely. Exactly. So, as you say, it is a competition kind of between 250 to 300 books. It seems to have gone up to 300 in the last few years. Definitely since I've joined, I think it's been 300 because the interest was there. And I think people started to realize that this was a thing that was happening, and it got more and more acclaim because as you know, book deals that kind of came as a result of the exposure, which was great. And also publishers kind of started taking a little bit more of an interest in things that were going on the self-publishing scene, I think, which is great, obviously.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of find out from the authors, like they're kind of into SPFBO, like how did you guys get into it? Was it something you just got told about word of mouth, or did you kind of hear about it one year and the next year decide to enter, or what sort of route did you take?
Well, I heard about it last year from author Andy Pellequin. He wrote something about it in one of his groups or posts or something. Anyway, and I checked it out. Unfortunately, last year I checked it out too late.
Yeah.
Because it had already been filled. So, but I thought it was a great idea, and so I marked it down to check it out this year, and I entered. So.
Yeah, exciting times, because it's still very much ongoing early phases at the moment. So yeah. Anyone else?
I think I found out about it maybe at a post on Our Fantasy, maybe during the SPFBO 3 finals. So I kind of followed along with that. I think I was just like manually checking the blog because I hadn't found the Facebook group, and I found the Facebook group like last spring at the start of the fourth one, and I hadn't realized there was this big community around the contest. So I joined the Facebook group. I didn't have anything to enter at the time because I was still writing the book. But I followed along the whole year, and it was great seeing kind of all the stages. And then, I had finished the book maybe a couple weeks before this year's entry, and was, nervously waiting on the morning of to make sure I got my email in at, I think 8 a.m., Eastern time. Because I remember the contest filled up within 2 days, the previous year. And I think we did that this year too. So the interest I think has been growing each year.
Yeah, definitely. And Sarah?
So I was invited by a private message from my friend John Kang, who's another indie author. He writes some great Asian fantasy. And he said, Sarah, this competition is amazing. I love it. And I love finding books in it. You have to join. And so I jumped over and joined that morning. It was last year. So SPFBO 4. And I think I snuck my entry in right around noon. And so then this year I was waiting, and I got it in right at 8, just like Jonathan.
Just waiting. Yeah, it definitely seems to be like filling up like this now. I think on the day where Mark Lawrence announces it, he always does a big build up to it and everything. And then it's just instantly you start seeing all the titles appearing on this long list. And I think that's when everyone starts getting really excited in the Facebook group. Is like, we start seeing all the names, we start seeing like, oh, is that someone I've heard of? Oh, that title is really cool. And it just starts getting more and more momentum as the day goes on, and people start adding more and more books. Poor Mark must have no life on those 2 days where he's just sitting there typing out the names of the books. But it's definitely exciting, I think. And I love the way that it's run so that you can see it kind of almost in real time, where he's updating things and you can keep checking back on the day, which is what I do when it's the day of like everyone entering. So, and then it's even more exciting for me, and probably for you too, Mihir, when you kind of find out what's in your batch. Like, what do we get to read this year? Is it stuff by people we know? Is it someone we've never heard of? Is it something that sounds really cool when you start looking at all the blurbs? How do you kind of do that?
It's actually quite exciting, like you mentioned, like in a year, because you see those entries start appearing. And I actually want to tell a funny anecdote. It involves Anita. So this year, when I was watching all of the books start pile up, and I'm always interested in the blurbs. So when I saw one of the blurbs, and I don't know why, but this year I think there's been a couple of books which are talking about like pirates and nautical fantasy.
Yeah.
And Anita's book blurb really grabbed me. I went on Amazon, and before you know it, I had bought out the entire trilogy. And then
It's easily done.
it's easily done. And I didn't even want to know whether it was going to be in my group or not. I was like, this seems too interesting. I'm just buying it. And that's literally what happens. Like, every year we have all of these amazing books coming in. And this year, finally, I caved in and bought in Kindle Unlimited as well, just because I was like, I better do something about my book buying.
Yeah, I got a few of the books from SPFBO too already, and I've got several more on the wish list that will end up in the Kindle. There's just some great looking books in the competition.
Definitely. It's really hard, I think, to like sit down and then you have to Google every single one, or Goodreads is what I use, to go and find every single one. Sometimes you can't find them because they're indie books, so they're under an acronym, or like they have initials or something, and you spend ages sort of hunting around like, is it this one, is it that one? And then eventually you get down to whatever it is. But yeah, it's so fun, I think, to just kind of have all these new titles that you've never heard of before, the majority that you've never heard of before, suddenly kind of being exposed to you. And there are some amazing cover artists who are working with some people who you've never heard of before as well. So it's not just the authors who are getting the exposure, but it's also the artists behind their designs as well. So lots of these authors and artists would probably kind of sit under the radar because of the lack of being able to connect with bloggers or reviewers, which is the biggest challenge, I think, from what I hear from self-published authors. What do you guys think? Before SPFBO was a thing, how difficult was it to kind of connect with a reviewer and get something out there?
Well, I don't know that it's that easy to connect with reviewers. In fact, I think it's incredibly difficult beyond this. It's very easy to connect to readers, though.
Yeah.
And you can connect to them without having to go through a reviewer, but you get a lot more clout if you have a great reviewer in your camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is hard to connect to reviewers. In one way, but it's another way you can just Google and get a lot of lists of reviewers, whether or not, then you have to sort through them and find the ones that fit your genre, take self-publishing. And so, it's a big process.
Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of going through that now. And, in an ideal world, we all have our book ready, 4 months before it's published and have an arc ready to go, like kind of the traditional publishers. But, sometimes it doesn't happen. And, lots of reviewers have lots of stuff on their plate. So it is tough kind of finding reviewers who are interested in your genre and who have time and, can read your book, in the near future. It's an ongoing process. But I agree with Sarah. It's easier to reach out to readers who, through there's, group promotions on like BookFunnel where we're able to give away our like short fiction that's tied in. So I think that's a good way to kind of get out the word. But obviously, it's good to get, a reviewer on your team, as Sarah said.
Yeah, I think from sort of a reviewer's perspective, because I'm not an author, I make no claims to being an author ever. It's not something I have a particular interest in being, much to people's shock. Everyone always asks me, when are you going to write a book? Never. Never if I can help it. It sounds very hard. I don't want to do it. So, but I love reading other people's books. And I think from a reviewer standpoint, it was only, when I started my channel, I got a couple requests from independent authors, and they were kind of the first people who contacted me when I first started my channel saying, oh, could you read my book? And I'd never heard of these people, but I was also very new myself to the internet. So I was like, sure, a free book? This is amazing. Like, this never happens. I can't believe this has happened. And that's how I started reading self-published, was because people started contacting me because of the channel. And then as I got more and more followers and kind of made more videos and got more, I don't know, clout is probably a good word, as you say. I think I find it harder now to fit in self-published around traditional published, because traditional publishers, when you get in with them, they like to spam you like massively. You end up with masses of books, which sounds like a great problem to have, and it is a great problem to have. But it does mean that the self-published stuff kind of can slip a little bit under the radar sometimes, because a lot of the time I get an ebook version of a self-published book rather than a print one, because people don't always have the budget to print, which is fine. But it can just mean that it gets a little bit more forgotten. So for me, the SPFBO was a great opportunity to kind of sit down and actually start reading self-published and give it like a dedicated time. I'm part of this competition, therefore I need to read at least 30 books and probably a lot more that I find whilst doing the competition. And I found that I found so many good ones that I felt more and more motivated to accept self-published works from other authors who were not in my batch, or other authors who just kind of found the SPFBO and thought, oh, I'll try my luck. I'll just send an email and see if they're happy to review it. That's kind of been my experience with it. But I think definitely having a reviewer helps, but you're right, that connecting to the readers is the most important thing of all for an author. But how do you connect to lots and lots of readers? Probably via a reviewer or someone with a big name to help get your voice out there a little bit more. So one of the other things that I wanted to kind of talk about is reviewing titles. A lot of people nowadays actually pay reviewers to do book reviews, especially some self-published authors who are struggling and kind of want to get their name out there quickly when their book's being released or something like that. Personally, I don't accept payment for reviews, but I know some people do. And this competition is currently completely free. It's free for authors. It's free or voluntary for reviewers to kind of come in and volunteer their time to sit down and read all these books and potentially review them. And what do you guys think about that? Is that something you've kind of come across where people have maybe asked for money for reviews, or you just kind of expect that might be the mentality, whereas this competition's a little bit different? It's free.
Most of my reviewers are much smaller than you, but they have been free. I have paid for one slot from a review team that's very specific for my subgenre. So they're very well known for YA fantasy. And I've paid for a spot with them for their Instagram feature. But for 90% of other reviewers, it's usually free. They do it for the love of it. And I really admire and respect that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been contacted a couple of times, about paid reviews. I don't do them, mostly because I can't really afford it. And so, I just tell them politely, thanks for the offer, but I don't do paid reviews. I don't pay for reviews. So, so all of my reviews and blogs and stuff have been free.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience. I think, the vast majority of the book bloggers and booktubers are doing it for the love of books. So, they're happy to do it. They do it for free, and they love getting all the, finding new books and reading them and talking about them. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the SPFBO is kind of a good example of that, because everyone who signs up as a reviewer for the SPFBO has to kind of commit to reading at least part of 30 books, probably 39 if you think they then have to read the finalists from the other batch as well. We don't all have to review everything, but a lot of the bloggers actually do end up reviewing the majority of their titles, if not all, in some form. Even if they don't complete it, they'll kind of give a little overview of what they thought of what they read, that kind of thing. And I think from my point of view, I like to review everything to some extent. And that's because I feel like a responsibility as a reviewer when I'm given someone's book to highlight that maybe it didn't work for me, but there's still merit to this. And there's always merit to it. It's just finding what it is, and why it didn't work for me could be the exact reason why it works for someone else so spectacularly well. Mahir, do you kind of find that with SPFBO, you're reading loads and loads of titles and you feel a bit of a responsibility to review them?
Well, I used to I'm just going to go back firstly to that question of the paid reviews or not. We at Fantasy Book Critic are completely free. We have been free since our inception. In fact, we have it in our tagline that we do. This is a passion project for all of us. We never accept money, though. We've been missing out, for the last 10 years or so.
I think I might have been as well.
Yeah, I wish we were taking money, but no, we don't. We sometimes have been approached by authors that they want a paid spot on our blog, and we have to tell them we are sorry, but we don't really. This is not advertising. These are the books which we love, so we are featuring them. And if you happen to like a book, we'll feature it on our blog too.
Yeah.
But it's tricky, I'm guessing. Like, I mean, there's, I think there was a case with one of our, not winners, but like Joshua Bancroft. I think when he was going through, he had mentioned that he even had tried, like, his book wasn't getting any traction, and he had tried to get like a paid review. Nothing happened. And then he just happened to enter SPFPO 2. And then thanks to Pornokisht, I think that was the blog, which Jared Shurin, who highlighted him, and then his book just flew off. And thankfully, it's where it is, where right now it's one of the highlights. It's one of the few books which didn't win the competition, but yet went on to win 6th place.
No, exactly. I love that series. It's fantastic.
I know, it is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Well, and going back to your question, in the first couple of editions, I did have that problem. Like, I wanted to review each and every book in my lot, and it was difficult because I was the lone reviewer back then. In the first 3 editions, I was the only person in my group, but which you are experiencing right now, Kitty. But no, since last year, I've actually broken down and I said, I need help because I have a family, 2 kids, and it's just not possible. So I now have a group of people who we all work together. We divide our book into lots. We still like to review or at least read 25 to 30% of it, try to give you like a fair opinion of to why it did work or why it didn't work and who might it be good for. And then we just try to pick our finalist. Last year we couldn't pick our finalist, so we had to go with the Senlin safety net option.
Yeah.
So this year we're hoping we get a good lot. But I noticed that, Kitty, your lot is actually quite an interesting lot. You're like the dark fantasy group of death. It's like a lot of titles, and almost all of the good ones are dark fantasy ones. So I'm very interested to see what you've come out with in this year's finals.
I know. I'm very excited about my batch this year, actually. Last year was good, but my first year was really, really strong. And I thought, maybe I've had a really good first year because I'm new. Maybe Mark's just given me the good ones. And then now I'm getting all the duds. I mean, they weren't all duds. Some of them were really great, but I had a lot more duds in my second year. But this year seems like it's gone back to being very, very good. And I'm a bit scared because I think I might have the opposite problem to the Senlin, where I'm like, I've got 10 books, guys. So I'm not sure. It's going to be quite tricky, I think. I've only read 2 so far. I'm like halfway through my 3rd because I moved house like a week ago, which was terrible timing. Really, I should have done that way before SPFBO began. But yeah, because of that, I haven't really been reading very much. But now I'm massively back into it, and SPFBO always gets me really excited to read everything. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about getting to some more of them very, very soon. It's gonna be a tricky year though, for sure.
Yeah, I read one of yours recently though, Devil's Cape. That was really good.
Oh, did you? Oh, I haven't read that one yet.
I read 2 of Kitty's too.
Oh no. You guys are ahead of me on my own batch. That's terrible. I'm sure it'll be good when I get to it. I'm very excited. There's a lot of good sounding stuff in my batch, to be honest. So yeah.
I read 2 of yours so far and they were absolutely amazing.
Oh, it's terrible. That is terrible news. It's great news, but also terrible. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I'll figure something out. So going back to the SPFBO, what do you think is different about SPFBO compared to kind of a traditional competition or reviewers kind of just reviewing stuff on their own platforms? What do you think makes SPFBO kind of different and appeal to so many people? Because the group on Facebook now has hundreds, if not thousands of members. And yeah, so many people, like if you tweet about SPFBO, they'll be like super onto it straight away, the hashtag and everything like that. It definitely seems to have got quite a momentum going. And what do you think kind of sparked that, besides obviously the amazing Mark Lawrence spearheading it, which I think is a big factor. But what else do you think about it is kind of making it different?
I think sorry, go on, Anita.
I was going to say, I see it like it's like a celebration of books because all the reviewers are very excited, and you get even when you're getting just the tiny little 30% reviews or talking about it, you get a good sense of the book. So I mean, I think readers realize that too, because they're going to get a whole bunch of books and they're going to get talked about, and they're all going to be some, like you said, some merit to them. So I think that's what it really is. It's kind of like this celebration in this little community. At least that's my perception of it for the first year.
You're definitely right about that. It's and I've noticed this since the first year since we have grown. Like Kitty, you mentioned like the Facebook community that's grown like from a few hundred members to now I think over 1,000 members. The hashtag on Twitter, definitely a lot of people jump in and express opinions. And I think the community has grown really strong. Plus, it's like a good avenue for self-published authors to just show off their like here's my book. Maybe someone will like it, maybe someone will not. But then it's still a celebration of everything self-published books can offer. I know it's supposed to be fantasy, but then of course there's like the digression into the subgenres, and sometimes sci-fi also sneaks in under the name of fantasy. But it's exactly that. It's a celebration of everything any self-published author can put out there, and just we want to help them. And I think, like you mentioned, it's Mark Lawrence's enthusiasm, because he's been diligently doing this for 5 years and running, and I hope he continues to do it for 5 years more.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Plus, there's kind of almost like an Olympics feel about it. Some of us in there, I mean, we do this full time, and you spend a lot of time in your house writing books, and you don't see a lot of other people, and you interact with readers, and that's a lot of fun, and you sell a lot of books. But to actually go head to head against other people and just see how you do, it's kind of fun. Even if you don't do well, it's still fun to see who beat you and why they beat you.
Yeah, I think as all of you guys have mentioned, I think the community around the contest is just like a huge part of it, and everyone's kind of following along. Like leading up to the entries, everyone's getting excited all the whole weekend when the books are coming in, and then kind of waiting for like the first reviews to come in. And the authors in it are really excited to be in it and to meet other authors, and all of the reviewers and bloggers I found are like just so excited to be a part of it. And so this is a great kind of coming together of everyone. As Anita said, it's like a celebration, of all these books.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the community side of things is the bonus that I never expected. And I think a lot of people find that as well. When I agreed to be a judge, because I joined in the 3rd year, and it was after Mark Lawrence put a tweet out on Twitter saying like, oh, I need another judge. And someone else who watched me was like, can booktubers do it? Because Kitty G would be great. She does review self-published. And I'd never heard of the SPFBO before then. I had heard of Mark Lawrence. I'd even read his books, but I hadn't heard of this other venture he was doing, because I don't tend to go to author blogs that often, just off the cusp, unless I want to know when their new book is out, which occasionally I do. But I hadn't really gone on his actual blog. I'd only been on his sort of website. So I didn't know about it. And I think when I agreed to do it, because he said, would you be interested? I said yes. He didn't really tell me about this SPFBO Facebook group. I think it was actually maybe even you, Mihir, who kind of said to me like, oh, do you want to join? Something like that. Someone else who was a judge definitely said to me like, there's a Facebook group. And I actually didn't have Facebook at the time.
Was it Petros?
It might have been Petros, actually. Yeah, it could have been him. So it was someone who was involved heavily in it all, and they were like, join the Facebook group. And I actually got Facebook back in order to join SPFBO, because I deleted it ages ago. And I wasn't using it. Now I'm obsessed, so it's a problem. I blame SPFBO entirely for it. But anyway, and I joined it just to get into this community. And the discussions that I found going on in there, not just about the books that were kind of going on in the competition, but also just about like self-publishing in general and sort of different people's lives. You kind of get an insight into a lot of the different people in the community and what's going on with them, and like big events that happen when people get traditional published deals, or when people bring out a new book. Like you hear about it mostly through that group. And it is really a celebration of kind of everyone who's involved in the community, not just the people who are currently competing in the Hunger Games. I like that you said Olympics rather than Hunger Games. I really feel like it's a bit more Hunger Games feel. But Olympics sounds a bit more like charitable, like a little bit more nice. But yeah, it definitely has that vibe, I think, of competition, but friendly competition. I think everyone's rooting for everyone. And you don't really feel like anyone's out to get you in this. It's very much like whoever does well, great, and whoever doesn't do well, we still want to read your book at some point, because it sounds amazing too. Even if they didn't like it, we might still like it. And I think we get that on every single post in the group, is that if something negative has happened, other people are there to pick you up and really support you, and vice versa. Like when something amazing happens, everyone's very happy. So it seems like it's a real bonus, the community that surrounds it, and that's a big perk, I think. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the effect that it can have on people's careers, because as you mentioned before, we've had a couple of authors who've entered previously and then gone on to get either traditionally published with a mainstream publisher who are very well known, or just have had very large success continuing on with self-publishing since the competition. And obviously that's happened with quite a few different people over the years. But definitely Josiah Bancroft is one of the bigger names. But I know there's been a couple of others who've been picked up by Orbit. Not even just winners, like you said. Some of them have come either out of the competition or come like second or third, things like that.
I think I remember the book's name, The Shadow of Things to Come or something like that. I'm trying to Google it.
Yeah, James Islington.
Yeah.
Who?
James Islington.
Yes, that's him. That's him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
He was from the first edition, and then Michael McClung had got picked up by Ragnarok Publications. It was like a small indie publications, but it just kind of petered out, but that's a different story. From the second year, we had our winner who was picked up by, I think, Crown Publishing, Random House,
Jonathan French.
Jonathan French, yeah. He'll kill me for forgetting his name.
I'm useless with names as well, don't worry.
Yeah. And then Josiah, of course. From the third year, I don't think we had any people being picked up. But then last year, we definitely had a few more people. And then I think someone from last year got picked up by someone else. And oh God, this is really, I should have written down the names. I have it in my head. It's just jungling along. But yeah, there's at least been every year, there's been at least one or two people who definitely get picked up. Oh, Devin Madsen. Devin Madsen definitely has been picked up by a publisher who shall go unnamed. And K.S. Willoso, she I think had also entered. She has been definitely got her cover release from Orbit. So yeah, we're kind of picking steam along. Like I think even publishers are now paying attention, and literary agents are paying attention to some of the reviews and some of the specific books which come out, and they're like, oh, this book sounds interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's great, obviously. So it's clearly having a fantastic impact on people who want to go down the traditional publishing route. Some of them have managed to do that as a result of kind of the exposure that comes along with SPFBO. But in terms of the people who maybe don't get the traditional publishing deal, but do get the exposure, how do you think that's kind of affected everyone who's been involved?
I think that it's actually really special for us because as indies, we can reach indie readers quite well. Like I make a very happy full-time living as a writer, but trying to find ways to access readers who like traditional books is very difficult because they're not in our regular spheres and they're hard to reach. And finding reviewers who are willing to write reviews about us to people who usually read traditional books gives us an access to that market that we wouldn't have usually. So even if we don't go very far, or even if we don't seem to be super more successful after SPFBO, you guys have given us access to a whole group of readers we wouldn't usually get access to.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? No?
I think it's also, the kind of the author connections you can make. I came across a lot of authors I hadn't heard of last year. I wasn't in the contest, but I was, trying to find some similar authors to, my book as I was writing it. And so, this was the first place I thought to look, like, where can I find like a group of, the biggest group of like indie kind of fantasy books that, so I went through there and, met a lot of, people through that. And, those connections are super important.
Great. Yeah, I definitely think that is something that's kind of tangible to look at from the outside, is that even people who don't know what the SPFBO is necessarily, and they've just heard the term, it can kind of build exposure for everyone. And it's definitely visible that some people are making much more successful kind of careers out of their books, which are basically the same book, just being re-released. Now that they've got the exposure from like a publishing house or a reviewer kind of backing it. I know there were some books that I've had over the past few years where like the book has come into the competition with 0 reviews. Either it's just been published or it's been published and no one's read it and reviewed it yet. It might have been read but hasn't been reviewed on Goodreads. And as someone who buys books largely based off of reviews I see on Goodreads. And I think a lot of us maybe are guilty of that, either word of mouth or you check Goodreads and you see, does it have a good rating? Does it have people that I know who've read it? That sort of thing. I think any book that has no reviews or like one review, to me, it's kind of off-putting, even if I know it's self-published and it's maybe not been traditionally published and have the backing. I find it very difficult to be like, oh, that looks really good when there's just one review. I like to have a mixture so I can be like, oh, what did the person who liked it say? And what did the person who doesn't like it say? And where do I fall? Are they like me or different? So I think some of the books that I've had have come in with 0 reviews. And then by the time the competition is over, they actually have like hundreds of reviews, or at least a sizable amount more than they had when the competition started, because not just the reviewers are reading the books, but you guys in the chats, the other authors are sitting down and reading their books and posting reviews for them, which is obviously boosting that morale and giving them the exposure as well. But not every reviewer is going to have a massive reach, even the ones who are in the competition. So I think the added bonus of like everyone else in the group reading and supporting one another kind of really helps as well. So
yeah, the Goodreads reviews are a bit tricky because, you know, for some self-published authors, like, you know, when they're new, they don't really have even like a little bit of fan following, and sometimes some people do post it. Especially if there's like the reviews are in single digits. What I tend to do is I look at the sample. I like to jump in and read the sample if possible, and then it'll tell me, like, you know, the sample's usually the best indicator of, like, you know, oh, I'm gonna like this or I'm not. And then of course, if I see someone like, you know, say you or Patrick or, you know, Lucas or even Esme, if they've reviewed it, that gives me a good indication. Or even like Lynn Williams, I feel like, you know, with her and my reading taste, they're pretty similar. So if she likes a book, I know I'm gonna love that book as well. So if there's, like, you know, people whom I know whose reading interests align with mine, and if they have read it and if they have liked it, then that's usually a good indicator for me to grab this book.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very easy. As soon as I see someone I know, be it like a member of the SPFBO or someone who reviews books, who's read it and they've liked it, I'm like, brilliant, I'll probably like it. And there's definitely people in the group who I sort of align my tastes with a little bit better. I think Esme and I have similar tastes, for sure. So there's definitely quite a few books that she reads that I'm like, I will add that to my list. And I think their book from last year was one of my favorites of the finalists as well. So definitely find that I have quite a similarity with her. But I think I'm the nicest of all the reviewers for how I like review my books from looking through the list. I think authors must be quite happy when they get me, because I don't tend to review very harshly compared to everyone else. There's some people who review really harsh, and I'm like, whoa, didn't like that one then. So it's quite fun, I think, when it gets to the final stage where everyone has submitted their finalist book and you have no control over the rest of the judges at that point. It's like, well, I love this book and I hope you guys do too. And then it either like soars or plummets and you're like, okay, don't worry, it's fine. I love it still. So it could be quite fun at that point, watching everyone else. I'm just like rooting for it. Come on.
And I think I have to point out one author, Jonathan Pembroke, for his Restraint, because I think it was in the 3rd or 4th edition. I think it was in the 3rd edition when his book
was when I joined,
It became a finalist, and unfortunately, I think it was only I liked his book, and I think BookNest, the people who had recommended his book as a finalist, had liked his book, and everybody else somehow just hated it, and it got some of the harshest reviews. But that poor guy, and I have to admit, I'm friends with him right now, but that poor guy took it out with a strong chin. He just like for every review, he incredibly took each and every review, and I think that was his debut book as well. And he took it with such incredible restraint. And it, like, even right now, I think he still comes on the Facebook group and he still, whenever there's a negative review, like, you know, it's okay. It's just this reviewer's review, but yeah, it'll be fine. So gotta highlight
He does. Yeah, and to be honest, he's one of the more memorable people to me because of that. You know, the way he handled it with such decorum was actually very respectable, I think. And I remember his name far more than some of the other finalists in that year because he really did handle the criticism very well. And I mean, I didn't like his book, but I like him. He's very nice. He seems like a lovely guy, but his book just wasn't for me, which is often the case. So, yeah, it could be really hard when you get to know some people in the group and they're really nice, and then you get to read their book and you're like, oh, it's not for me.
Yeah.
It can be tricky, but I mean, nothing is going to be for everyone, is it? So I think everyone, who's sensible knows that kind of thing, and we all try and just give each other the respect. Like, I am always in awe of people writing a book. That's, to me, just amazing. So the fact that you guys have done that, whether it gets like amazing acclaim or not, just to me is inspirational, really. And as a reviewer,
and fantasy, it's such a wide tent that
That's
it
true.
must be very hard for reviewers, because your favorite subgenres might be very different than the books that you get given.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the criticisms that SPFBO gets occasionally, is that we don't get assigned books that might appeal to us. We just get assigned the books in the order that Mark Lawrence gives them out, basically. So it's pretty much random, and that can be maybe a make or break for some books that might have worked so well with one reviewer and might completely plummet with someone else. But I guess that's just the luck of the draw, and we have to draw the line somewhere with how we do things. You can't just try and like help every single book when no one has any idea about any of them, like what they are and that kind of thing. So it can be criticized for that. And I understand that criticism, but how do you fix that?
True. And I can give you one specific example from last year, like Kings of Paradise by Richard Nell.
Yeah.
That book, before it had entered, everybody was raving about it. Everybody was like, this is going to be the book which is probably going to reach the finals, probably even win it. And I think it was in Nicole and Khan's group, and it just flatlined with them.
I didn't
and
like it.
Yeah, and it's completely, it's not, nothing against Nicole. She did she specifically pointed out why it didn't work for her. And it's very true. All of her points were very valid, because like we were expecting, like, if we had gotten the book, it would have reached the finals, because both Lucas and I, who were like reviewing last year,
with me as well, I think.
We loved it. And so
did.
it's a case of that too. Like, it's unfortunate that, but I think we were bugging Mark about that. Like, hey, maybe can we have the blogger judges, give off like our likes in our subgenres, and then, you can assign them. But I think it'll again be it might get a little bit too difficult, I would say, or just too complex for like, to be able to just assign genres and then, say, this book maybe. And then of course there's the thing of like, all bloggers knowing the authors and authors knowing the bloggers, because I'm definitely, and Kitty, this is the same for you as well. You're very friendly with a lot of authors too. So, you got to draw the line somewhere as well. And I definitely know Mark will, not give us books which we are, when we are really good friends with the authors. So it's just tricky. It's very tricky.
Yeah.
If I feel for Richard, poor guy.
Poor guy.
I'm curious, does it work the other way? Like, do you read a book that in a genre you don't usually read and then just love it?
Yes, definitely. I think it can certainly work that way. There's been lots of books that I've read that were urban fantasy, and I would never class myself as someone who reads a lot of urban fantasy, but for some reason for SPFBO I seem to get quite a few of them. And I would say, if someone asked me, I don't like urban fantasy, but I don't think that's true anymore. I think I just wasn't reading the right urban fantasy until I kind of got into some of the SPFBO titles, and I started to find that actually I do like urban fantasy, just not the type I was reading before. So I think it can certainly kind of open your eyes to some different genres. And one of my titles this year sounds super romance heavy. And you probably know the one I'm talking about, but it sounds super romance heavy.
Succulus Lips?
Yes, that one.
Oh my God.
That's the one. And it's got this crazy, like, out of this world space fusion kind of cover going on, like all these colors, neon stuff. It looks crazy. But I read the blurb and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, like, romance is not my thing. I'm not sure about this. And then I read the blurb and I was thinking, you know what? This sounds great. Maybe I'm going to love this book. I hope I love it. But it's very different to what I normally read. But it sounds like it'll be a good laugh. So I'm looking forward to that one, actually.
And SPFBO, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on, Sarah.
I was just going to say, it always gets a bad rap for YA too. It's that people say you can't go anywhere with YA, but Megan Crew made it to the semifinals last year, or the finals last year with her YA. So
it's tricky. Like, it depends on very much so on the reviewer's interest. Like, I know YA and maybe like romantic fantasy sometimes get like a bad nod at SPFBO, because somehow the blogger judges, nobody seems to be like, too much into that side of the genre. I know we had gotten a book in, I think, the third edition, which is really interesting because it had Greek mythology, Norse mythology, and a bit of a romantic feature added to it, which is really nice. And I was surprised. Like, it was one of our semi-finalists. I think it was by Laura Adenrock. Oh God, I'm really bad with things again. It was by an author named Laura VAB. I don't remember her last three initials, but it was VAB. That much I remember distinctly. But yeah, no, it's always tricky. YA books, though, I feel are always a different matter because they aren't. I mean, they're good books, but they aren't that complex enough to compete with something like, say, a grim dark fantasy or an epic fantasy because of the limitations of the YA genre itself. Not because of the authors, but just because of the limitations of the genre.
Yeah, I think YA can find it quite tricky to go up against a massive epic fantasy or something like that, where the detail level is hugely different. But I think YA could do well if we got some really interesting ones that deal with like the subgenres and topics that you don't see that often in YA done well. And I'm kind of like, if I get YA in my batch, that's what I want in my batch, is like something with a little bit of difference going on, stuff that's kind of going to stand out from the other YAs that I've read, which I used to read explicitly YA. So it was just, predominantly that. But now I'm very much an adult fantasy reader most of the time, with the occasional YA sprinkled in just to like lighten my palette. I like YA to just refresh. It's quite a good way to do that, I think. But I definitely think it can do well in the competition. I think we just haven't seen that many YA entries yet. I think it's only recently we've seen a lot of them start coming in a bit more. I definitely didn't have many YAs in my last 2 years. I think I had like one or two out of the mix.
I think urban fantasy is also one genre which probably hasn't gotten a lot of titles. I think last year, though, we did have a really good urban fantasy.
It's just me.
Yeah, but last year I think it was Sworn to the Night by Craig Schaefer, which was an incredible book, and I think that really paved the way of like what urban fantasy can really do, even within its genre, and yet have something extra to appeal to epic fantasy fans. Like I love that book and that trilogy. I really, really, really do. And I think it came fourth last year, didn't it?
Yeah, something like that.
By half a point or something like that. But yeah, that was really it was really close. But that was like a really good example of a book kind of overstepping from its genre and then doing really well. I'm like an urban fantasy junkie, so I always love urban fantasy. I'm hoping that people.
We should trade. Let's trade some books.
Hence, I read Devil's Cave. Like when I read the blurb, I was like, "Oh, this is so much like what I wanted, like what I would like," and so that's why. But yeah, no, I'm looking for like the next best urban fantasy, and I'm hoping there's more like urban fantasy books as well in SPFBO, so that way we can and maybe Mark will give them to me, and I can oh yay, urban fantasy.
Yeah, you have to be good for Mark to give you like the right sort of books. You've got to get on his good side.
Oh, I'm not been on its good side for a long time then.
But yeah, I hope that answers your question, Anita. I think definitely it can go the other way, and we can be surprised as reviewers. I think I'm always surprised by SPFBO titles when I read them and like them, and I'm like, why aren't people reading this? Why aren't people reading this book? It's so good. Why aren't they reading it? And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go shout about it to everyone I know. So there's definitely been some books over the years that I have really, really loved and just wanted to tell everyone about, even if they weren't my finalists, just books that I'm like, wow, that was so different. And I think the self-published side of things kind of gives you the flexibility to do things that traditional publishing doesn't. That's one of the big perks, where you can kind of go a little bit rogue. Like Josiah's series is weird. Like it is weird. And the fact that it's been picked up by a traditional publisher is quite weird as well, because it's not the typical thing that they would publish. But obviously they found that it was getting a really good reception and they wanted to pick that up. And I think the guy who works in their company read it and loved it. So that always helps. But definitely it's not a normal kind of traditional fantasy book that you would expect to see. It's doing a lot of things that are quite different. And I think that self-publishing kind of gives you the flexibility to do a lot of those different things, which you didn't necessarily see normally. Like they're not the tropes that you normally get. And I think that's why I always get surprised. I'm like, oh, that's not what I expected to happen here. So it can be quite exciting.
Do you mind, Kitty? I have a question for Anita and maybe for all of the others as well. Anita, your book, I remember when I saw it, the blurb, it really caught me with like nautical fantasy, coast and pirates and everything like that. my question to you: what made you write that, and also maybe to Sarah and Jonathan as well for their books, like for the ones that they have entered this year. Like, what made you write that specific book, or like that mix of that genre?
Well, actually, the book came out of a little bit of flash fiction I wrote for a contest.
Mm-hmm.
And also because, well, I'm from Nova Scotia, so, we've got all the seafaring and the ghost stories, and I have an interest in Greek mythology, and I just sort of smushed it all together and wrote the book. And originally, I had only planned to flesh out the flash fiction into a short story, and then the short story became a novel, and then the novel became a trilogy, and there's like several more trilogies that I want to write in this world now. So yeah, it sort of became the book that won't go away.
That's pretty awesome.
Mine also kind of came out of a piece of flash fiction. I had been doing some flash fiction prompts a couple of years ago that, Chuck Wendig, he posts, I don't know if he still does, but he was posting every Friday. This one, I kind of just, the premise for like a flash fiction came out of like nowhere. It was like, what if there were, real world quests that were like hidden somewhere on Craigslist? So I wrote this piece of flash fiction in like an hour. It kind of all came together, 1,000 words, and I submitted it to a couple of flash fiction websites. Nothing really happened, and then I, over the next couple of months, I kind of built it out and tried to figure out like how could this work as like a longer story. But, I don't typically read urban contemporary fantasy, but this kind of story just kind of kept speaking to me, so I went with it.
I was sitting in the Walmart parking lot, warming up my car, trying to get it warm enough to move in the middle of a Canadian winter, watching a man stand in the parking lot smoking in 30 below weather. And I thought to myself, what makes a person stand in the middle of the freezing cold and smoke? Like, can smoking really be that important? And then I got this idea about, well, what if when you smoked, it brought in a spirit that possessed your body and took over and did interesting things with it? And that was my jumping off point for Summernight, which is my book in the competition.
I wish I had this sort of thought when I was like doing something. Maybe I'd write a book if I had a cool thought like that.
Well, I'm definitely gonna be looking into Jonathan and Sarah's book after our talk. Is like they just like these blurbs are like really intriguing to me.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to read some of them. So, okay, so I think we're probably reaching almost the end of things. So I just wanted to ask like one or two more questions to everyone. So first off, what besides your own book for you guys are you rooting for in the competition? Is there anything that you've read that you think would deserve a spot as a finalist so far, or is there anything that you think, just from like looking at the cover and the blurb, would deserve a spot as a finalist so far?
My favorite cover in the competition didn't make it in the competition for covers. It's Elise Kova's one, Vortex Visions. And I've read some of Elise's other books and adored them. So I'm thinking that's going to be a strong competitor. And I read through all the samples in my blogger's selection and went on to read A Sellsword's Compassion by Jacob Peppers. And I really enjoyed that one. So I think it will be a contender also.
Oh, exciting. Okay.
Yeah.
Have to watch out for those ones. Anyone else got any they're rooting for?
Yeah, well, I got a couple of friends in the competition, so I'm rooting for them. But also, I think what's the title? Is The Fox and the Hunter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's one of our groups.
The Viking, Viking one. Yeah, that one to me, I love Vikings, so that one to me, I'm following that.
Jonathan, any from you?
I've heard a lot of things about The Sword of Kagan, which I think is in our group. And in terms of other, I have a couple friends also who are in. I'm rooting for. I love Travis Riddle's cover for The Narrows, which I think made it into the cover finals, cover contest finals. I've been meaning to read his other book, Balam Spring, which was in last year, and then Sweet Blade by Carol Park. One of the other groups, and Unfortune's Fool by Angela Board looks really, really good to me. I think that cover also made it into the cover contest finalists.
Cool. Yeah, no, there are lots of them around. I mean, Sword of Kagan, the one you mentioned, is in my batch. It's got a lot of hype. I feel like there is a lot of hype, and I've got friends who've been like telling me for ages to read this book. So I actually owned the book before the competition because the author sent it to me ages ago, but I hadn't even looked at it yet because I just have an ever-growing TBR. And then it got in my batch, and I was like, oh, finally, okay, I'm going to get to read the book, thank God. But yeah, it seems to have done really well on hype. And then obviously there's the like familiar names. Rob J. Hayes has got a book in this year. He obviously did very, very well before, and we know that like Ben Galley is a traditional, like he's one of the most well-known self-published authors rather, and people like that, sort of still big names within our community, have got quite a few books in this year. So I think some of those are going to be ones to watch, but there seems to be a lot of hype around some of the others. I feel like because more people are connecting with each other now, I can't even choose which ones to root for anymore because I want to root for them all, and they all sound good. So it's tricky. Mahir, are there any that sort of stand out to you on initial impressions?
Oh, well, some I have read before, like even before this year's competition. Like there is Prince of Cats by D.E. Olesen, which I read last year, which was like a really cool book. It's like a Prince of Persia meets Scott Lynch's, Gentleman Bastards, except that it's not Prince of Persia, it's Prince of Arabia.
Cool.
Then there is Devilscape, which I read. Like it's urban superheroes and crime noir. So it's like Sopranos meets The Avengers in Louisiana. Then there is, of course, Rob J. Hayes' Never Die, which I read and loved. There's, I think there's Richard Nell's, what was it called? God King Legacy. That cover was really good too.
Yeah.
It's like Flintlock fantasy and demons. Then, well, Anita's book, I'm really like, I'm rooting for because like pirates and demons and everything. That just sounds fantastic in my head. There's too many books.
I know.
There's this in our lot, like Lynn Tesley's book, which Sarah mentioned, or was it Anita? I think it was Anita with The Fox and the Hunter. That's her first semi-finalist. There is another book called Shadowless by Randall McNally, whose cover also I think was the public winner. That one is really interesting. Like I've been reading that, and I'm almost close to the end of it. It's like it is like Clash of the Titans meets Robert Bennett's Divinity series. It's really cool. Like it's got 20 chapters. Each chapter has its own protagonist, and they're in this land which gods have children, and then they harvest them. It's dark, but it's pretty cool.
That sounds pretty intriguing. You're good at the old book pitch, like, oh, it's like this meets this. I'm terrible at that sort of thing when I do reviews. I'm like, I don't know what it's like. Harry Potter? Default? No, you're much better than I am.
Oh, no. This is just me thinking out loud a lot.
What's good thinking? Yeah. Okay, so final question then. Final thoughts on the SPFBO. What are we excited about? What stages are we looking forward to kind of looking out for? Like which reviewers are we most excited to kind of see their thoughts on things? You don't have to say me and Mahir. Definitely don't.
Yeah.
I just love seeing that lineup at the end, that finalist lineup, and reading all of those. It's just a really exciting point for me.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah, well, it's all new to me, so I'm kind of excited for everything. So yeah,
I'm excited to see what comes out of this year's batch. I mean, I have a big list from last year that I need to get through.
I know that's the problem. It never ends.
Yeah, I'm only just reading Semlin Ascendant. It's my current read, so I'm a little ways behind.
Yeah. For me, it's like Sarah mentioned, the 10 finalists. I want to see which 10 books make it all the way towards the finals. And I know this year we have like a shortened first phase as well. It's only 5 months, unlike last year or all the editions before it's 6 months. So yeah, I'm excited for that. And then of course, going on to next year when all the 10 finalists will compete against each other, it'll just be terrific and nerve-wracking. I don't know how you guys authors do it, but it's nerve-wracking even for us.
Yes, it is. It's terrible when people you're like, oh no, someone's posted a review. What do I do?
Yeah.
Do I read it or not? Or do I just look at the score and then decide if I read it? Yeah. No, it's good fun. I always get excited for the last stage. I think that it starts off as quite a sort of just you and your books kind of competition where you're reading your own ones predominantly. And then as soon as you've submitted your finalist, that's where it starts being like, okay, now I have time to read everyone else's books. Where do I go and what do I read? So it's always good fun when that sort of thing happens, I think. But yeah, I'm really glad we sat down and had this chat. Thank you all so much for joining me. Final thing is just, where can people find you on the internet if they want to look up your books or find out a little bit more about like book reviews that you do, that sort of thing? So Anita?
Well, I'm mostly in my Facebook group, AF Stewart's Minions, or over on Twitter at Scribe77. I also have a website, Welcome to Avalon, and I go over to Instagram every now and again at AF Stewart Author.
Cool. Jonathan?
My book, Guild of Tokens, I think you can get to my website by going to guildoftokens.com. Otherwise, it's johnauerbach.com, and I'm on Twitter, Facebook at JA Auerbach.
Cool. Here?
Well, we are a group of reviewers who can be found at fantasybookcritic.blogspot.com. We are also on Twitter at fantasybookcritic and on Facebook under the Fantasy Book Critic Facebook page. But you can, meet all of us. There's Justin Bergman, there's Lucas Borowski, there's David Stewart, there's me, there's Cindy Hannickman. We are all there on Facebook and in the SPFBO Facebook group. Just say hi.
And Sarah?
Thanks for so much for having me on, Kitty. You guys can find me at sarahklwilson.com. That's KL the letters. And also in the Discord at Dragon School.
Great. So thank you all so much. My links, as always, are down below, and I will try and remember to add everyone else's links that they just said when I go back and add more stuff to the description. So hopefully if you're watching this later on, you'll still be able to find all their details as well. We'd love for you guys to come over and join the SPFBO group. If you've never joined it, then look it up on Facebook. I will put it in like the third line or something of the description so you guys can go and join it, because that's where the majority of the discussion happens. But thank you all once again for coming and joining me. I'm hoping to do some more SPFBO specific live shows in future as the competition kind of gets a little bit more intense, and once I've started reviewing some of my books for you guys. So that will be a lot of fun. But thank you again, and we're going to say goodbye for now. So bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
for having us. Bye.